Okay, can everybody hear me? Good morning. My name is Chris Gida. I'm a regional director at a company called NCC Group. Today I'd like to walk through my proposed program for assessing point of sale type devices against tampering attacks. So as a QSA company, one of the major risks that we've identified is that merchants are struggling with the inspection and training requirements that they need to do as part of PCI requirements, but to identify things like tampering and substitution for their payment systems. So as an example, some of these programs can take a lot of time and effort, specifically merchants who are maybe smaller in size. They don't have the resources or the the knowledge to be able to support something like this. So definitely something that we've seen seen quite a bit. So I'd like to dive in a little more today, talk about tampering, talk about skimming in a little more detail. Then we'll go into some examples of what items like that would look like. No, we're not going to hack something today, but I do have some examples of things that we've seen or some research that we've completed. But then also start going through the proposed program I just talked about. Things that I suggest to clients for creating a program for assessing tampering. So in the beginning, so tampering is not a new attack. This is something that's been going on for quite a while, but it has evolved quite a bit over the last few years. When I first think about tampering and what that means and where I heard it, I usually think about going to a restaurant and you've got your receipt there and your credit card and wondering whether the server's going to take your information. So what they'll do is they'll take the receipt, they'll take the card, they'll go to the point of sale device to run your transaction, and then they could either write those credentials down, or as you can see, the picture on the right, use a handheld just mag swipe device to steal all that information. From there they could do things like falsify tip information or go onto eBay later and buy some cool shoes that they want. From there we evolved a little bit more. Everyone knows about the tap to pay type systems where cards became RFID enabled, allowing just a quick tap on a device. Well, that allowed attackers to use an RFID reader to walk up close to somebody, touch an iPad to their butt or something like that, and then capture credentials that way, full mag stripe type data. That led to the invention of things like copper lined credit card sleeves and copper lined wallets. So definitely something that's been around for a while, but as you'll see, it's gotten a little crazier. So skimming attacks are definitely on the rise. You go online, do a little bit of research and Googling, and you'll notice things like counterfeit transactions where you create either a duplicate or a false card. Those have been on the decrease, but skimming has been up significantly. As you can see, year over year, 2014 to 2015, skimming has increased roughly 546% for ATM skimming. Brian Krebs on his website quoted that same statistic for 2016 and confirmed, saying, it's basically the same trend for 2016. Verizon's 2016 DBIR kind of confirmed the same thing, quoting 102 different attacks, 86 of which were confirmed as data loss. But probably the more disturbing quote within that report, and I'll quote, payment card skimming remains one of the most lucrative and easy to pull off crimes. So just, that's crazy. I mean, as you'll see here in this presentation, some of these things are very cheap and very easy to pull off. Why wouldn't you if you were, an attacker? So what's the problem? What we've seen with companies is that they have pretty good policies in place for the physical security of their payment systems or their, the servers in the back of house at a retail outlet. But the problem is that they don't have a really good program to support looking for skimming attacks and identifying those items. So that's probably been the biggest part, is that you talk to retail staff and they have no idea what to look for. Also, oh, go ahead. We'll talk about that here in about 10 slides. yes and no. So we'll talk about here in a second. One of the other concerns or questions that I get from usually people higher up who are over maybe retail systems or something like that at larger corporations is, I don't want to do this. It takes a lot of time and money and effort, and seriously, what's the risk? What's actually going to occur? So any good company, they'll put in systems based on the risk and the cost benefit. And, in theory, if you've put in a well-designed, architected solution, not only should it reduce the risk to an acceptable level, but it should cost less than the breach. So, if you've spent a lot more in putting in security controls than the breach itself, why would the business support putting in those controls in the first place? They're going to just say, we'll dish it out to insurance, or we'll just take the hit itself. So when I go through that conversation with clients, there are usually three major things that I touch on. You think of, the simple risk metric in, determining that likelihood impact equals whatever your risk rating is. Companies don't struggle with impact as much. There's a lot of data out there to support it. Was the Fonimon or whatever institute has been quoted saying that the average breach is somewhere around $4 million worldwide, and the actual record cost is something like $150 or something like that. So again, we have a lot of data to support that. What companies struggle with a lot is the probability. What is the likelihood that we're actually going to have this type of breach, through, say, a skimming attack? So things I like to point out. These devices are really easy to obtain. Go to Amazon. Wireless keylogger is $50. RFID reader. Any of these devices we're about to talk about are cheap. Now, some of the more sophisticated ones, not so much. You have to create those yourself, or you have a 3D printer. We'll talk about those, but for the most part, a lot of these are cheap. Also, how are you going to get caught technically when you've gone in, put something in place and may not be detected for months? It's a very, it allows attackers to be able to do something and not get caught because they don't have to go back and forth or check that device. A lot of these things are wireless these days. So, their decreased chance of getting caught means they're not going to get detected, means why not take a stab? Also, attackers have increased motivation. Credit cards these days, if you go on the dark web, are not really, lucrative, but if you can get both a credit card and a PIN for a chip and PIN, or a debit and a matching PIN, then they're very lucrative. Something like $50 a pop. So, skimming a few hundred, few thousand, that's some quick cash there. One other item I like to bring up to clients is that no one, for some reason, reads their MSA, their Merchant Services Agreement. Anyone who does business with Visa, MasterCard, JBC, you name it, they have to fill out or sign an agreement with them, their MSA. If you read the details of that, there is some very interesting language that basically says you're going to cover everything related to a breach, even if it's suspected. So I'll give you an example of an MSA that we reviewed for a customer that they were not aware of, that, yes, they signed. If you, merchant, are determined by any card organization, regardless of any forensic analysis or report, to be the likely source of any loss, disclosure, theft, or compromise, must promptly pay us for all related expenses, claims, assessments, fines, losses, costs, and penalties under issuer reimbursements. Basically meaning that even if we suspect you had something and it wasn't something and we bring in a forensics team, you're going to pay for that. So that's a cost that most organizations don't realize or don't consider. Lastly, you got to think about, tangible and intangible costs. Some of these that, we're familiar with, but others that are a little less harder to quantify, especially when you're talking about the, determining something as a critical risk. So the first one is the initial cost of a breach. Again, we have those statistics. We can roughly figure out how much it's going to cost for the breach itself, but also victim costs, things like, you're going to pay for identity fraud monitoring for all of your clients that were affected, things like that. The time it takes for stock prices to recover. So as we've seen with Target, as we've seen with Home Depot, the stock price is going to take a hit. It typically recovers, as we've seen, which kind of sucks from a security person's perspective. But, even if you're Home Depot and you take a hit and then 6 months later you're back up to your original price, if not higher, from an investor perspective, why would you even want to take that hit? And then lastly here, damage to the corporate reputation. So this one's a little less easy to quantify. The CSO magazine published an article basically saying there are things that we care about, like attracting the top talent, attracting consumers, buyers, investors, things like that, that, should you be breached, maybe your top talent doesn't want to go to your organization, or, maybe there's somebody that you want to do business with that now, they don't want to do that business anymore. So those are considerations a little less tangible that companies don't necessarily think about, and there's not a lot of data out there that we can support that with. So real quick, PCI is the only framework that I know of that directly points to things like point-of-sale systems and doing physical assessments for them, which is why I've kind of leaned on PCI throughout this assessment, even though things like ISO can easily tie into it. But there are basically 3 easy requirements. Have an inventory, periodically inspect, and do some training. So we'll go into those in a little more as I do the program piece, but those are essentially the easy requirements. If you look at a lot of the merchants that we review, okay, they can usually produce a pretty good inventory of things that are on the floor, not necessarily things that are stored in the back or kept by one of their service providers. They don't typically have a total inventory. Periodic inspection. Typically, they have no clue what to do here. They'll have a cashier or somebody look at stuff once a week. They have no idea what to look for. So this is kind of a typical miss. And then training, again, if they don't even know what to look for, what are they going to train on? PCI also brings into notion this idea of a QIR, the Qualified Integrator and Reseller. So this is a big piece. We've seen where sometimes you'll have an attack where somebody will go in, they'll put on a uniform or some suit and look like there's some official. Maybe they called in saying their point of sale swipe device is not working, and then they go in and rip that device out, put something in, and poof, you have a substitution situation where they've completely altered this device, and now you have a compromised device in your environment. The QIR tries to prevent this because it's a vetted company where you go through and they know how to install it, they know how to configure it, they have a chain of custody both in bringing in the device and removing it. So in terms of PCI, they're a qualified service provider. You can outsource all that responsibility to them. Just a quick note there. Just one more PCI piece. Now, probably the more fun and interesting items instead of the high-level risk discussion. Let's go through some examples. So first I want to frame the problem before we go into examples. Hardware versus software skimming. So this is all hardware related as far as the items I'm talking about today. We're not talking about malware that's sitting in memory and scraping off of your POS device. Those are completely separate discussion, separate controls in the eyes of PCI. Card present versus card not present. So card not present would be things like an e-commerce transaction. This is all card present type stuff where you're sitting in front of the cashier at Walmart buying bubblegum. And then wireless security concerns. So, again, I already mentioned a lot of this stuff is wireless. You go and put some device in place, that attacker is not going to go, want to go there and try and remove it and, double their chances of getting caught. These are running off of Bluetooth, RFID, and as you'll see, they're now running off of SMS. Addressing the myths. So everyone, as you just asked, talked about things like chip and pin. Doesn't that absolve all these worries? Well, no. So let's talk about EMV. EMV started out as a group. It was Europay, MasterCard, and Visa. They created a standard for the chip and pin idea. That has been passed off to a company called EMV Co. Yeah, not confusing, 10 different EMVs, who now manages things like the transaction in the background between Visa, P2PE, some other encryption things, but they have a lot of different standards that they manage that are outside of PCI. Pin entry devices are tamper-proof. So when we talk about PEDs, we're talking about the device itself, not the chip and pin piece. There was some claims out there that if you open or dissect or alter that machine in any way that, there's some tamper identification mechanism in place. It's not true. There's been some researchers who have gone through, they've opened and dismantled some of these and, basically tampered with them. And all the things that manufacturers claim are not true. Some of them have some detectors, some things in place, tamper stickers, things like that, but not all of them do, and not all of them are completely tamper resistant. So some examples. We've mentioned keyloggers. These are not new. They've been around forever. They're very cheap. But, we still find them from time to time. I mean, we're seeing where merchants are still using the old IBM registers. They have the old DIN keyboard with the integrated swipe. And they have the whole the serial connection for the scanning gun or whatever you call it. So all these are still out there and still all plausible. There's ancient technology out there. So just as some examples, we've got an inline USB, the DIN to PS2 connector in the middle there, and then a lot of these are Wi-Fi enabled, which is just awesome. I mean, you don't have to pull that device out anymore. You can just walk through, connect, and download the information. One of the cooler items, and the reason why things like chip and pin are not a foolproof, is that we have things called pinhole cameras. Tiny, tiny cameras, as you can see. These are embedded usually somewhere in the local area so that you can steal, that pin when they put it in. I'll talk about it here in a few minutes, but, recommendations out there for the general public is cover your hand, make sure they can't see it. Some of these are positioned so well that, even trying to cover it, they'll still pick it up. You think about the new iPhone that just got disclosed, last week. I mean, these have dual 12 megapixel cameras, I believe, and the video can take 1080p video, and, they're slightly larger than what you're seeing here. I mean, these things are very powerful, very small, take not a lot of electricity, and, they can pick up a lot of definition. Some other examples, if you see on the far left here, somebody basically put a hardware insert on the end there, drilled a hole, and there's a pin camera in there that you would never even really notice. The middle is kind of the same thing. You see the little hole, there's a camera behind that. I don't know, information specific to the picture, whether that power thing is actually supposed to be there, but I mean, it's not far-fetched to say that they didn't just put a magnet on the back and stick it, And then also old school is, sticking one in the ceiling tile. That one is probably much less common. Couple additional examples. You see the pamphlet here. Basically, somebody ripped it off, cut a hole in the side, put a camera in, and then stuck it back on. I mean, all these are very difficult to see unless you're actually really looking for them. This one right here is for a Bank of America ATM. What they did is just customize a box, throw a camera in, and stuck it in the corner. Same exact color of the ATM machine itself, so you barely even notice that it's there. Very creative, very easy ideas, but they all are there to capture your credentials, not just PAN, but also PIN information. Another thing that you should definitely look for when you're going through and looking for tampering, anything that looks like something's been MacGyvered, where there's electrical tape and something that's soldered in your garage, that's usually a sure thing that something's wrong. When you take apart POS devices or point of sale devices, and you look at these, they're very neat and organized. They've been manufactured. It shouldn't look like anything like this. Some additional examples. This one the one on the far left, you have to actually open up and take apart. That's probably an example of one that's been removed and put back. That one's a little more sneaky. You'd have to open it up to realize that, there's a lot of extra wiring and a circuit board there that shouldn't be there. This one down here, there's, copper wire coming out there. And essentially what the attacker did was slip a little sleeve in there. So, in line, you put your chip and pin in there, and it will read it, through the sleeve and go through, flawlessly without you ever noticing. But there really shouldn't be, a wire hanging out. Same with the top example here. It looks like what they did is ripped off the top, and in process of that, they maybe damaged the corner. But why in the world would there be a wire there? Again, you go to a retail outlet. Why would a store associate know that that's wrong? Next example is broken tamper stickers. This is pretty easy. The only place that you'll find a really good example are gas stations where they have legit tamper seal stickers. And here are some examples of secure versus unsecure. If you go to a point of sale device, usually it's one of those old school, very see-through circle stickers. They go on the side. Those are kind of a joke. They'll peel them back and put them back on. So unless you know to look for a little glue on the edges, then, you won't know otherwise. Now here are probably the most sophisticated attacks that we're seeing today. Hardware inserts. These are very cool. But what they do is they'll take a 3D printer, they'll print these things out, and they are made to fit exactly over the POS device itself to where you don't even notice. The buttons work on top and push the button below it. It's just a shell that goes on top. So some examples here. Here's a Verifone insert in Genico, and then this is the real one. This is the one that made to go over it. I mean, they look near identical. They're the same color. Very hard to detect. And I'm really hoping this video works. So I have, give it a minute. All right, so 2 videos here. The first one from February, stupid thing. Okay. First one's from February 2015. Anyone seen the movie Focus with Will Smith? So basically they're a bunch of con artists and they go through and do different things to steal money from people. So very funny scene. They're getting ready to introduce this gentleman back here as one of the people from their team, and this is how they do it. And don't do this. Oh, I know what I'm doing. Two screens, yeah. All right, so the gentleman goes and finishes his transaction at the ATM, and then our con artist comes up, just pops it off and walks off. It was funny. I mean, in 2015, it's almost like a mockery. It's like, oh yeah, that's really going to happen. All right, a year later, as I lose my cursor again, this is at a gas station, very famous YouTube video. So let me pause it real quick. So a little context here. So you got 2 guys here who are working together. One guy's got some chips, and what he does is he's talking to the clerk there, and he points intentionally to the back. He wants the cigarettes top shelf as far back as possible because he's given his guy right here as much time as possible to slip the hardware insert on. So what you'll see is he's got his bag, he just pops it out, puts it on top, and it takes less than 3 seconds. Just keep an eye because I think they play it twice. So there he goes, pops it on, boom, inserts on. The only way they noticed is a couple days later when I think there were some fraudulent transactions noted. So what they did was just went back and caught it on video. Where'd you go, cursor? Oh, there it is. Okay. Some more examples of hardware inserts. I mean, again, they're very custom. They're made to fit the device that they're being put on. What you'll notice over here is that, I mean, there's just this little sleeve that goes on. This little tag, I believe that's where it's got, your wiring and stuff like that, just to hide everything there. Again, mag stripe insert right there just goes on top. They look exactly the same. This one I thought was extremely creative. I mean, there's a little indentation right there where you put your pin pad. Well, they created a metal sleeve to go on top of it, make it look flush. How in the world would you know that those are there? Gas station insert. The original with the hardware insert on top. So a lot of these are very difficult to identify. To make it worse, Brian Krebs announced about a month ago that they detected a new hardware skimming device where they basically taken a cell phone apart, and now they're creating these hardware inserts that will send the data over SMS. So they don't even have to be near, they can be across the globe and receiving credit card information. So now I wanted to go into the program that I talked about. This is going to be a little bit of dry information. There's a lot of stuff here. If anyone's interested or wants more information, I have a lot more to support this. But this is just kind of the 50,000-foot view. Go online and you'll look for things like, how do I prevent skimming attacks? They have everything out there. Some of them are really dumb. These are probably the top 5 with 1 or 2 of mine added. So look for broken tamper stickers. Okay, I guess that's easy, but I don't know if they actually replace them unless you're talking about a gas station where they take that a little more seriously, so that's not necessarily a good one. A good one, wiggle parts. You saw a lot of those inserts or, something small on the end. Just wiggle and check those items. The manufactured items are not supposed to be loose. So just wiggle those. Cover the keypad with your hand. Okay, you can try. Hopefully the camera doesn't pick it up. Enroll in advanced authentication mechanisms. So this will probably be something we see in the future. It's out there, but it's not used widely. Where, for example, there's a client that I worked with. They have software in your phone. It'll start gathering information about you. Where you typically shop, IP addresses you typically go to, sites you go to, and they'll basically create a risk profile score so that when you go through for a transaction, anytime you do that, it will correlate, and if you're in China at the time, it's going to say, yeah, you fail at the moment, I need you to re-authenticate. So some of those are still newer technologies, but they'll be coming down the road. And then lastly, watch your account and report it in a timely manner. One thing I've heard is that, okay, you might identify that somebody, created fraudulent transactions. But what credit card companies are doing is sometimes they won't reimburse you because it's been 2 months or something like that. So basically, watch your accounts, watch them often, and then report it as soon as you can. Often when I go on site to a client and we're talking about creating a program or, assessing payment devices, there are a lot of people that are involved. You wouldn't typically think of that. If you have, I think we have a bunch of auditors, assessors, security people in here. A lot of the things that I'm about to go over is like, no brainer, right? But when you got a whole slew of people that you have to work with and, perform training and reporting and things like that, it becomes much more difficult to make sure that everyone's on the same page and doing what they need to be. So I've seen where associates are responsible for checking these devices. Again, some kid who's in high school or college who has no idea what to look for. Store management. You talk of like a front-end supervisor or manager or somebody who's managing the drawers and stuff like that. They're often pegged with this duty. The problem there is they have no time. They're supposed to be opening or closing the store, and they really don't want to do it. Internal audit. They love to enforce it, but they're not the ones doing it. So, they like to yell at people and say they need to do it, but again, difficult to enforce. Business operations, they're the ones who are challenging you, saying, is this really a risk? Do I really need to do it? And, they're not really looking for guidance or buy-in. They just, okay, what's the bare minimum I can get away with? And then lastly, of course, IT or IS. Usually those are the staff that try to do some training or help create a program. But, if you look at someone like Home Depot who has 2,200 stores, it's a challenge, to try and get people potentially on multiple shifts on every single, do you assess every day? Do you assess every week? Quarterly? What does that look like? It's just difficult when you got this many players potentially involved in the program. So a couple things I recommend. All right, commitment and support. Easy one, very strategic item. Unless you have top level buy-in, if your executive management or people who are responsible for retail systems don't care and they don't want to do it, they're not going to enforce it. They're not going to tell their staff, yes, take it seriously, we have to do it. They don't care either. So make sure you get the appropriate commitment and support. Strategy and rollout. I've seen where companies say, yeah, we're working on our PCI compliance. The ROC is due in the next 60 days. I need you to do this tomorrow. And, they basically crack the whip and say, do it immediately. You don't need to know why, just do it. I've seen much better implementations where there's a strategy and rollout where you're getting all the people involved. You do some training, provide some examples, definitely something that I recommend. And, be very specific in terms of roles and responsibilities. We saw all the different people who could be involved in something like this. Make sure everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing. Tamper assessment procedures, which we'll talk about here very shortly. You can't just say, hey, look for something malicious. Make sure you have actual defined procedures, things to look for, examples, pictures, something to help that associate or front-end supervisor to actually perform the assessment. Document. Make sure that anything you identify or any discrepancies you notice, that they're documented and sent to the appropriate people, whether it's your IS team or incident management, whoever that happens to be. Asset management. Again, I mentioned that, a lot of times the things that are on the floor or the things that are in the back office, merchants are very familiar with those items, but the ones that are stored away or maybe they're in a box tucked under the register, or that, they have a service provider that manages these, they have no idea about those items. You can't protect what you don't know, you can't inspect what you don't know. So, should one of those devices show up at a later point, or you don't know if they've been altered or, whether it's a malicious device or not. And lastly, incident management. Should you identify something, what do you do about it? Do you just note it, put it in the log, and then when your PCI compliance comes, through, someone checks that log and says, oh, you identified a random wire and you did nothing about it? Make sure that somebody's acting on that or, looking into it, making sure that it gets resolved. Also, something I highly, highly recommend, and something I've seen kind of work in the past, I've evolved that thought, is to take a perfect state profile. So if there are scratches or wires or screws missing, what is that perfect state so that here's the difference. Take pictures of the top, bottom, left, right, do the entire cube and have those available for your store associates so that when they go through and do that assessment, they're like, oh, that hole is supposed to be there, or that sticker is supposed to be there. Give them something that they can reference. Make sure that they know any changes or exceptions. I mean, maybe when you're installing it, you dropped it and there's a scratch on the top. Okay, we can accept that. Make sure it's documented so that they don't bring it up every single time. If there's something major, wires hanging out, call your QIR, work with your incident management, get that thing removed and replaced with something that, should be there and is, less suspicious. Create a profile for each device. I've seen a lot of merchants that will have multiple POS versions, an Ingenico and a different model here. Make sure you have one for each model, just in case there's discrepancies there. And then lastly, the profile should include things like your mounting bracket, your cabling. How do you know if, how would a store associate know if there's a keylogger in there, or if there's an extra wire being run that shouldn't be there? Maybe, there's a serial port that shouldn't be used and they decide to use it. The location, any accessories attached to it, those should all be noted in the perfect state. Couple quick essential items here that I've seen in programs that should be done. PCI has several frameworks other than the DSS. One of them is the PTS, Pin Transaction Security Standards. Make sure that you're not using outdated systems. The PTS compliant devices have been assessed both from a hardware and software standpoint, and they're usually good for something like 4 to 8 years. So make sure that you have a compliant device and it's not really out of date. I would recommend using a QIR company. You don't have to according to PCI, but it's liability that you can shove off, and a really good practice and a process that you don't have to implement otherwise. Secure your payment devices. So mount it. I've seen where, people have POS devices that are just sitting on the edge there that you can kind of move any direction you want. You can turn around, pull a cable out, whatever you want. Make sure they're mounted and secure to the checkout, the register area itself. Cable management, this is something that people do not do often. I mean, even if you just put it in one of those ribbons that, tucks all those into one area, it just helps to reduce, somebody from having access to those. It's a time suck just trying to figure out how to get that out and pull it and put a new one in or put an additional item in. Thoroughly document the perfect state. And it seems like a no-brainer, but I mean, there are companies, retailers out there that don't use CCTV. I've heard the argument that, oh, if we pick up somebody putting in their PIN at the point of sale system, then that's in scope for PCI, and we're capturing, cardholder data on our CCTV. Maybe. Okay. Also, I've seen where retailers, maybe they have 30 domes within their store location. Only half of them have cameras in place. So, the domes are there for a deterrent. They don't always have CCTV. All right, and going through that checklist I mentioned, I'll go through this very quickly again. If you guys need more information or would like some better examples, I've got a lot more to support this. Inspection preparation, okay, what do you need? You need your perfect state stuff, something to document it, make sure that associate, has instructions for what to do. Asset inventory and placement inspection, so making sure that you can account for all the devices, that their serial numbers match, things like that. The payment device inspection itself, look at the color, the condition, wiggle things, make sure that there are no additional marks. Maybe there's a sticker that you identified, that, there's a hole underneath that it's covering, all kinds of different things that you can check for and go through. I won't, read each one of these. Exposed wires, missing screws. I mean, these all seem fundamental, but to, a front-end supervisor or an associate, maybe not. Payment area inspection. I've never seen anyone do this, so good idea to do it. When we're talking about pinhole cameras or small cameras to capture, pin, nobody checks any of the area around it for, a box or a charity thing or, anything that you would have around that register where you could pop a camera in or, put something in to hide it. Nobody that I've seen performs those. And also perform rogue wireless scanning. I'm not talking about, use your iPhone and see what wireless pops up. We, want to check for Bluetooth. We want to check for RFID, the whole gamut. Make sure you have a legit scanner to perform that. And lastly, follow-up documentation. Note any new discrepancies. Contact your IR if you need to. If they're known items, normal wear and tear, okay, those are fine. At least they're documented. If it's something major or new, you might have to rip it out and put something new in. And then, as good process maturity, essentially have any opportunities for improvement. If there's better ways you can do it, make it faster, quicker, neater, of course, implement those items. I apologize for talking very, very quickly. There's a lot of content. I hope, is very helpful. I want to open up. Anyone have any questions or any concerns I can address? Go ahead. And I'm guessing based on the so to rephrase, holiday season coming up, there's a potential for attacks. What can we advise clients to do to kind of prevent some of these items? And I would assume you're talking more retail where they have the point of sale devices. I would say just talk to them and try and get some sort of program in place. If they perform some level of inspection and some level of training, it's better than probably 85% of what I see today. Today, it's usually a policy line item or a procedure that says, look at the thing and make sure there's nothing, it's nondescript. The people who do it, when you interview them, they're like, I don't know, I just fill out this form once a quarter and we call it done. So I would say today, anything is better than nothing. Any other questions? Okay, well, looks like I'm a little early, and I'll give you guys a little bit of time back to your day, and appreciate it. Thanks.